The envelope lay on Isobel Croft's desk, like a black stain against the morning light. She had opened dozens of letters in her 24 years, but none had ever made her hands hesitate, quite like this one. The paper inside was thick and cream-colored. Expensive. The handwriting was perfect. Too perfect. As if the writer had practiced the same elegant script for lifetimes. It read simply, Lord Blackwood Alistair Thorne requests the pleasure of Miss Isobel Croft's company for dinner at Blackwood Manor, Friday next, at 8 o'clock. Isobel set down her pen, leaving a fresh ink smudge on her right forefinger. She had heard the name Blackwood Thorne whispered in London's drawing rooms. Always whispered, never spoken aloud. You're not seriously considering this. Dr. Samuel Reid stood in the doorway of her study, his medical bag still in hand from his morning rounds. He must have seen the envelope's black seal from across the room. It's an invitation to dinner, Samuel. Not a proposal of marriage. It's an invitation from a man no decent family will receive. Samuel crossed to her desk, his face grave. My grandfather told me stories about Lord Thorne. His grandfather told him the same stories. Do you understand what I'm saying? Isobel understood perfectly. She had done her own research after the invitation arrived. Lord Thorne had owned Thornwood Manor since 1547. The same Lord Thorne. Not his son or grandson, the records were clear. Portraits from 3 centuries ago showed a man with the same severe features, the same widow's peak, the same pale silver-grey eyes that seemed to look through the canvas itself. Impossible, of course, yet the records didn't lie. Perhaps he's simply long-lived, Isobel said. Some families have remarkable. No family is that remarkable. Samuel picked up the invitation, holding it as if it might burn him. They say he remembers the Great Fire, that he can describe the execution of Anne Boleyn as if he stood in the crowd, that he speaks of the Crusades like a man recalling his youth. They say many things. Isobel took the letter back from him, running her thumb over the signature. The ink was black as midnight, and something about it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Most of them are probably nonsense. And if they're not, she met his eyes. Samuel had been her late husband's closest friend, and after the fever took Thomas 2 years ago, he had appointed himself her protector. She valued his friendship, but his constant hovering had begun to chafe. Then I shall have a very interesting dinner conversation, she said. Isobel, I've made my decision. Samuel's jaw tightened. Your stubbornness will be your undoing. My stubbornness is what kept this house after Thomas died. She gestured at the study around them, the desk she had fought Thomas's family to keep, the books she had refused to sell, the small independence she had carved from grief and determination. I won't apologize for it now. After Samuel left, she sat alone with the invitation. The smart thing would be to burn it, to forget she had ever received it. But Isobel had never been particularly smart about self-preservation. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write her acceptance. Her hand moved steadily across the page, forming words that might change everything. Outside, clouds gathered over London, turning the afternoon dark as evening. In the corner of her study, the shadows seemed to deepen and watch. The carriage wheels crunched over gravel as Isobel arrived at Blackwood Manor 3 evenings later. The house loomed before her, all sharp angles and dark stone against a moonless sky. Every window blazed with light, yet somehow the brightness made the building look colder rather than welcoming. She stepped down without waiting for the driver's assistance. Her best dress, a deep burgundy silk she'd worn only twice since Thomas died, rustled as she moved. The fabric felt strange after so many months in plain morning clothes. A woman appeared in the doorway before Isobel reached the steps. She was perhaps 60, with iron-grey hair pinned severely back and a face that might have been kind once. Now it held only wariness. "Mrs. Croft." Not a question. "I am Miss Finch, the housekeeper. Lord Thorne is waiting in the garden." "The garden?" Isobel glanced at the sky. Full dark had fallen an hour ago. "At this hour, His lordship prefers the evening air." Mrs. Finch's tone suggested this was not open for discussion. She gestured toward a stone path that curved around the side of the house. "Follow the lights. He will find you." The dismissal was clear. Mrs. Finch retreated inside and closed the door with a solid thud. Isobel stood alone on the steps. Behind her, the carriage was already pulling away, the driver evidently paid to return later. The crunch of wheels faded into silence. She could knock. Demand a proper reception indoors like any civilized person. Instead, she followed the path. Lanterns hung from iron posts every few yards, casting pools of amber light. Between them stretched pockets of shadow so deep they seemed solid. The garden itself was wild in a way that spoke of deliberate neglect. Roses grew in tangled masses. Ivy crawled up stone walls, thick enough to belong to a fortress. The path ended at a circular clearing. More lanterns hung here from the branches of ancient yew trees. In the center stood a fountain, its water catching the light as it fell. And beside the fountain stood Lord Alistair Thorne. He was taller than she'd expected. The portrait in the Historical Society's archives had failed to capture the sheer presence of him. He wore black evening clothes that fit with the precision of wealth. His hair swept back from a sharp widow's peak, black as the shadows around them. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Pale silver grey, like winter ice. They fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Mrs. Croft." His voice was cultured, precise, and "Thank you for accepting my invitation. You didn't give me much choice." She moved closer, refusing to show the unease crawling up her spine. "Your note implied you knew something about the property dispute." Direct. A faint smile touched his mouth. "I appreciate that. So few people say what they actually mean." "I don't have time for games, Lord Thorne." "No?" He moved then, and the movement was wrong somehow. Too smooth. Too fluid. Like watching water flow rather than a man walk. He circled the fountain, keeping the same distance between them. "You came to my home at midnight to meet a man you've never spoken to. That suggests you have time for at least some games." Heat rose to her cheeks. "The dinner invitation said 7 o'clock. Did it?" He stopped, tilting his head. "My apologies. Mrs. Finch must have misread my handwriting." He was lying. Isobel was certain of. But why? "The property dispute," she said firmly. "You mentioned evidence that my cottage belongs to me." "I did." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded paper, but he didn't offer it to her to. "Tell me, Mrs. Croft, what do you know about the history of your home?" "It was built in 1780. My husband inherited it from his aunt. And before that? Before that doesn't matter, doesn't it? He moved closer. The lantern light caught his face, throwing sharp shadows across his features. Their cottage was built on land that once belonged to Thornwood. The original deed specifies that ownership can never fully transfer. It must return to this estate. Ice flooded her stomach. That's not possible. I have the documents. He held up the paper. Signed and witnessed, legally binding. Then why invite me here? Her hands clenched at her sides. Why not simply evict me? Because I'm offering you a choice. He stepped closer still. Now only the width of the fountain separated them. You may leave peacefully. I'll provide compensation, enough to establish yourself elsewhere, or... His pale eyes held hers. Or you may stay, utoi, as my guest. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. I don't understand. Don't you? He extended his hand across the water, offering the paper. Read it, then decide. Isobel reached for the document. Their fingers brushed for just an instant. His skin was cold as marble. The London archives smelled of old paper and dust. Isobel sat at a scarred wooden table, her fingers tracing the edge of a leather-bound ledger. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting pale squares across the floor. She had left Thornwood Manor 3 nights ago with more questions than answers. Lord Thorne had mentioned her late husband's name, Thomas, in connection with a property dispute. A dispute Thomas had never told her about. The ledger before her contained records of land transactions from 2 years past, the year Thomas died. Her finger found the entry, Croft, Thomas, sale of property rights, Ashwood Lane. Buyer, Blackwood Holdings. The date made her stomach twist. 3 weeks before Thomas's death. Finding what you need, Mrs. Croft. She looked up. The archive clerk, a thin man with spectacles, hovered nearby. Yes, thank you. She kept her voice steady. Do you have the correspondence files for this transaction? He disappeared into the stacks. Isobel pressed her palm flat against the ledger, as if she could absorb the truth through her skin. Thomas had sold property. Property she hadn't known he owned. Property he'd never mentioned. The clerk returned with a wooden box. Everything related to that sale, ma'am. Inside, she found letters. Thomas's handwriting leapt out at her, familiar loops and crosses that made her throat tighten. She forced herself to read. The debt must be settled. I have no other choice. Debt. Thomas had debts. Another letter. This one from a solicitor. Your creditors grow impatient. The Ashwood property is your only remaining asset of value. Isobel's hands trembled. They had lived simply, but comfortably. Thomas had been a clerk. Steady work. Steady income. Or so she'd believed. She found a bill of sale. The property had been worth £300, a small fortune, and every penny had gone to creditors she'd never known existed. Isobel. Dr. Samuel Reid stood at the end of the table. His coat was damp from rain she hadn't noticed starting outside. Samuel. She didn't ask how he'd found her. He always seemed to know when she needed him. What are you doing here? Mrs. Finch sent word. He moved closer, his face grave. Lord Thorne's housekeeper. She came to my surgery this morning. Isobel's chest tightened. Why? To warn me. She said her master has taken an interest in you that goes beyond property disputes. Samuel pulled out a chair, sat heavily. She said he hasn't shown interest in anyone for decades. That when he does, it never ends well. I'm not naive, Samuel. No. You're a widow investigating a man who shouldn't exist. He gestured at the ledgers. What have you found? She told him. About the debt, the property, the sale Thomas had hidden from her. Samuel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Thomas was protecting you, he said finally. By lying? By shouldering the burden alone. Samuel leaned forward. Isobel, whatever he owed, he paid. The question is, why does Lord Thorne care now? Why summon you to discuss a settled transaction? She had no answer. Samuel reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. Mrs. Finch said something else. She said Lord Thorne collects things. Beautiful things. Rare things. His eyes held hers. Things he wants to keep. A chill ran down Isobel's spine. She remembered Lord Thorne's pale grey eyes in the garden. The way he'd moved. The way he'd looked at her. Not with desire, but with something closer to recognition. I need to know what Thomas was involved in, she said. Even if it leads you back to Thornwood Manor? Especially then. Samuel pulled back. Then I'm coming with you. No, Isobel, this is my husband's legacy, my mystery to solve. She closed the ledger with a soft thump. I won't be protected from the truth. Outside, rain drummed against the windows. Samuel studied her face, and she saw the moment he surrendered. At least take this. He pressed something into her hand. She looked down, a small silver cross on a chain. For luck, he said quietly. Isobel closed her fingers around it, feeling the metal warm against her palm. The gallery occupied the east wing of Blackwood Manor, a long room with windows that would have flooded the space with light during the day. Now at night, candelabras cast flickering shadows across the walls. Isobel walked beside Lord Thorne, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She had returned to the manor against Samuel's warnings. The mystery of Thomas's debt and the property sale had consumed her thoughts for 3 days. Lord Thorne had promised answers about Ashwood Lane. She needed to know what her husband had been involved in. I have a passion for portraits, Lord Thorne said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. The human face reveals so much. Fear, especially, is impossible to hide. He stopped but before the first painting. A woman in an emerald gown stared out from the canvas, her eyes wide and white-rimmed. The brushwork was exquisite, capturing every detail of her expression. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she'd gasped just before the artist finished. Lady Catherine Ashford, Lord Thorne said. Painted in 1789, she was remarkable, intelligent, curious, utterly fearless. He paused. Until she learned what I was. Isobel's throat tightened. The woman in the painting looked terrified. They moved to the next portrait. Another woman, this one in a high-collared dress from perhaps 50 years ago. The same expression, eyes too wide, shoulders drawn up as if bracing against something. Miss Eleanor Hartwick, Lord Thorne continued. His tone remained conversational, almost pleasant. She discovered my nature quite by accident. Found me in the cellar during daylight hours. He tilted his head. I don't sleep as humans do, you understand. I simply wait. Isobel's hands had gone cold. She counted the portraits lining the walls. 12, 15, 20. All women. All afraid. Why are you showing me this? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Because you haven't run. Lord Thorne turned to face her fully. In the candlelight, his pale eyes seemed to glow. You came to my home despite warnings. You returned despite what you must suspect. I want to understand why. You said you had information about the property my husband sold. I lied. The admission hung between them. Isobel's heart hammered against her ribs. The nearest door was 30 feet away. Too far. I acquired the Ashwood Lane property 2 years ago. Lord Thorne said. Your husband sold it to pay his debts, yes. But the debts were incurred because he was investigating me. Hiring researchers. Bribing clerks at the parish registry. He found records of my existence going back 3 centuries. Isobel's mind raced. Thomas had known. He'd discovered the truth, and it had consumed their savings. He came to confront me 3 weeks before he died. Lord Thorne continued. He demanded I stay away from you, threatened to expose what I was. He moved closer. I told him the truth, that I had never met you, that I didn't know you existed. Then why? Because after he left, I became curious. Lord Thorne's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those silver eyes. What kind of woman inspired such devotion? What kind of woman would a man bankrupt himself to protect, even from a threat she didn't know existed? Isobel forced herself to meet his gaze. Thomas's death, the fever that took him, was it truly illness? Yes. Lord Thorne's answer was immediate. I had nothing to do with it, but I attended his funeral. I saw you standing at the grave, refusing to weep in front of the mourners. I saw you dismiss the solicitor who tried to explain your financial situation. You wanted to discover it yourself, to understand it yourself. He gestured at the portraits surrounding them. Every woman in this gallery feared me once they knew the truth. They recoiled. They prayed. They begged. His voice dropped lower. You're standing here, knowing what I am, and you're angry rather than afraid. You want answers more than you want safety. He was right. Even now, with her pulse racing and her palms damp, her predominant emotion wasn't terror. It was fury. What happened to them? She nodded at the portraits, the women who were afraid. I let them go, watched them marry other men, build their lives, grow old. Something ancient and sad crossed his face. I collected their portraits later, reminders of what I can never have. What do you want from me? Lord Thorne was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. I want to know if you'll still look at me this way when you understand the full truth, if your anger will sustain you when fear would be wiser. He stepped back. Your husband's investigation. I still have his papers, every record he collected. Would you like to see them? Isobel's breath caught. Evidence of what Thomas had discovered. Proof of what Lord Thorne was. She should leave, should run. Instead, she said, Show me. The door to Thornwood Manor slammed behind Isobel as she ran. Her boots struck the gravel drive in uneven rhythm. Her breath came in short gasps that burned her throat. She didn't stop running until she reached the iron gates at the end of the long approach. Her hands gripped the cold metal bars. The chill steadied her. Behind her, the manor loomed against the night sky. No light followed her. No footsteps pursued. He had let her go. That thought frightened her more than the portraits, more than his silver eyes, more than the impossible truth of what he was. Lord Thorne had revealed himself completely. Then he'd simply stepped aside when she'd backed toward the door. His voice had been calm. "You know where to find me, Miss Croft." As if he knew she would return. Isobel's hands shook. She forced them still against the gate. 2 years of managing alone had taught her this much. Panic solved nothing. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She walked home through the dark streets. Her mind worked through what she'd learned, like sorting through account ledgers. Facts in one column, questions in another. Thomas had discovered the truth about Lord Thorne. He'd sold their property to fund his investigation. He'd confronted a creature that had lived for centuries. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Lord Thorne claimed he hadn't killed Thomas. But what did the word of a monster mean? What did truth mean to something that had lied its way through nearly 300 years? Her townhouse was dark when she arrived. She lit a single lamp in her study. The flame cast shadows that seemed to move with purpose. She pulled Thomas's journals from the locked drawer where she'd kept them. She'd read them once after his death, finding only property notes and business records. But Thomas had been clever. If he'd hidden debts from her, he might have hidden other things too. Isobel spread the journals across her desk. She began to read with new eyes. The first journal revealed nothing, nor the second. But in the third, dated 8 months before his death, the entries changed. Thomas's neat handwriting grew hurried, cramped. Found another discrepancy in the parish records. A Lord Thorne witnessed a marriage contract in 1782. Same name. Description matches perfectly. This cannot be coincidence. Her fingers traced the words. Thomas had been meticulous, methodical. He documented everything. The entries continued. Each one revealed another piece of evidence. Property transfers spanning centuries. Court appearances. Always the same name. Always the same description. I must know the truth. If such things exist, what else have we been blind to? Isobel's throat tightened. She recognized that tone. Thomas had used it when pursuing any mystery. Determined, almost excited. Then the entries stopped for 3 weeks. When they resumed, the handwriting was different, shaky. I confronted him tonight. God help me, I wish I hadn't. He confirmed everything, showed me proof I cannot deny. The world is not what we believed it to be. Isobel turned the page with trembling fingers. He says he means no harm, that he's simply existing as best he can. I want to believe him, but I've seen the records. The women who disappeared, the families destroyed. I told him to stay away from Isobel, made him promise. He agreed too easily, said he'd never heard her name before. But he looked at me strangely when I spoke it, as if he were memorizing it. The next entry was dated 2 weeks before Thomas's death. I'm being followed. I see shadows that move wrong, hear footsteps that stop when I turn. Perhaps I was foolish to threaten him. To say I would expose what he is if he came near my wife. But I cannot live knowing such a creature walks free. Cannot sleep knowing Isobel exists in a world with such darkness. The final entry was written in a hand so unsteady Isobel could barely read it. I was wrong. It's not Lord Thorne I should have feared. There are others, so many others. They know I know they're coming. Isobel, if you read this, run. Leave London. Change your name. Never speak of any of this. Please. I'm so sorry. The journal ended there. Isobel sat back in her chair. The lamp flame flickered, cast her shadow long against the wall. Thomas hadn't died of fever as the doctor claimed. She'd known it even then, had felt the lie in her bones. But she'd had no proof, no way to question the official story. Now she understood. Lord Thorne might not have killed Thomas, but Thomas had died because of what he'd discovered, because of the world he'd uncovered, a world that included more than one monster. Isobel closed the journal. Her hands were steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving something harder behind. Thomas had tried to protect her by keeping secrets, by handling everything alone. And it had killed him. She would not make the same mistake. If there were others, if Lord Thorne was just one of many, then she needed to understand what she faced, needed knowledge, needed weapons. And Lord Thorne had answers. The Thames stretched before her like spilled ink, dark and restless. Isobel stood at the water's edge, Thomas's journal pressed against her chest. The wind pulled at her hair, loosening strands from her chignon. She had sent the note 3 hours ago. Meet me where the city ends, alone. No signature. He would know. Footsteps behind her. Not the sound of boots on gravel. Something quieter, smoother. Wrong. You chose well, Bobtel, Lord Thorne said. No witnesses, no one to interrupt. Isobel turned. He stood 10 paces back, his dark coat blending with the gathering dusk. Those pale eyes caught the last light like mirrors. Did you kill him? Her voice didn't shake. She had practiced this moment in her study, standing before Thomas's empty chair. No. I don't believe you. I know. He moved closer. 3 paces now. Your husband came to me with evidence. Paintings, property records, birth certificates spanning 2 centuries. He demanded the truth. And you gave it to him. He left Thornwood alive. 3 weeks later, his heart failed. Natural causes, the physician said. Isobel opened the journal. Her fingers found the page without looking. He wrote that you offered him something, the night he confronted you. He refused. Lord Thorne went very still. What else did he write? That you were lonely. She met his eyes, that you'd been searching for someone who could understand. Someone worthy of... She stopped. Of sharing the curse. His voice was flat. Yes. The word hung between them. Curse. Not gift. Not power. You wanted to turn him, Isobel said. I wanted to offer him a choice. A life beyond the brief flicker humans call existence. Knowledge. Time. Freedom from death. Lord Thorne stepped closer. He said no. He had you. That was enough. Something twisted in Isobel's chest. Thomas had known. He'd stood where she stood now, faced this impossible offer. and chosen their simple life. Their morning tea, her ink-stained fingers, the ordinary miracle of growing old together. Now you're offering it to me, she said. I am. Why? Because you came back. Lord Thorne moved to the water's edge beside her, close enough that she could see the absolute stillness of his chest. No breath, no heartbeat. Because you read those journals and you didn't burn them. You didn't run to Dr. Reid or the church or the constable. You sent me a note. I wanted answers. You wanted more than that. His eyes fixed on her face. You've spent 2 years building a life from nothing, working in archives, living alone, refusing every offer of help or protection. Why? Isobel's hands tightened on the journal. Because I'm tired of being saved. Exactly. Something shifted in his expression, almost a smile. Thomas was a good man, kind, protective. He would have kept you safe in a small, comfortable cage. You would have withered there. Don't speak about him like I'm not diminishing him. I'm telling you what you already know. Lord Thorne turned to face her fully. You loved him, but you were never equals. He made decisions. You discovered them later. He investigated me for months and told you nothing. The truth of it cut deep. Isobel looked down at Thomas's careful handwriting. All those secrets. All that protection she'd never asked for. What you're offering, she said slowly. It's not rescue. No. It's not safety or protection or a comfortable life. No. It's power. The word tasted strange. Time. The ability to do everything I've wanted without waiting for permission or approval. Yes. Lord Thorne's voice was quiet. And it's also watching everyone you know die. Decades of loneliness. The weight of centuries pressing down until you forget what it felt like to be human. Isobel looked at the river. A boat moved past, lamplight warm on the water. Someone laughed. The sound drifted across the current and faded. Thomas chose mortality, she said. He did, because he had something worth dying for. Yes. Isobel closed the journal. Her thumb traced the leather binding. I don't. True and terrible. I want to see everything, she said. I want to learn everything. I want to walk into rooms and have men like the ones who denied me work, who called me unnatural for wanting independence. I want them to fear me. They will. I want to be your equal, not your companion, not your student, your equal. Lord Thorne extended his hand. Then take it. Isobel looked at his palm, pale, unlined, unchanged for nearly 3 centuries. She thought of Dr. Reid's worried face, her small townhouse, the life she'd built from ink and stubbornness. She thought of Thomas choosing her over immortality. She thought of herself choosing immortality over everything else. Her hand moved. The Thames water lapped at Isobel's boots. She stepped back from the edge. You think I want this because I'm running from Thomas's memory, she said. You're wrong. Alistair's pale silver-grey eyes reflected the moonlight. Then why did you send the note? Because I'm tired of being the one left behind. The words came out sharper than she intended. Thomas made his choice. He chose our ordinary life. And then he died and left me alone with it. He loved you. I know. Isobel turned away from the water. But love doesn't pay the creditors. It doesn't give me the freedom to work without whispers following me through every room. It doesn't stop Dr. Reid from treating me like I'm made of glass. She faced Alistair directly. The wind had pulled her hair completely loose from its chignon. Dark brown strands whipped across her face. You offered Thomas a choice, she said. Now I'm making mine. Alistair went very still. That unnatural stillness she'd noticed in the garden. You understand what you're asking? His voice was careful. There is no returning. No changing your mind when the first century passes and everyone you knew is dust. I understand that I've spent 24 years being told what I can't do. Isobel's hands were steady. I understand that Thomas protected me by keeping secrets. Dr. Reid protects me by trying to keep me away from you. Even you. You let me run from Thornwood because you thought I needed time. You did need time. No. She stepped closer. I needed to stop being protected. Immortality isn't freedom, Isobel. It's watching everything you care about crumble. Then teach me not to crumble with it. The words hung between them. Behind Alistair, the city sprawled in gaslit shadows. London would outlast them both, Isobel thought. Or perhaps she would outlast London. There's pain, Alistair said quietly. The transformation. 3 days of it. I've had pain before. Not like this. He moved closer, and she could see the warning in his pale eyes. And afterward, you'll need blood. Human blood. Can you live with that? Isobel thought of the portrait gallery. All those terrified women. Will I become like them? She asked, afraid. No. Alistair's voice was certain. They feared me because they were my victims. You'll be my equal. Your equal. Isobel tested the words. Not your companion. Not someone you're protecting. My equal, Alistair repeated, which means you'll have the same curse I do, the same loneliness when decades pass. Then we'll be lonely together. Something shifted in Alistair's expression. Not quite a smile. Something older and more careful than that. Dr. Reid will try to stop this, he said, when he realizes what you've chosen. Samuel means well. Isobel's throat tightened. But I can't live the life he wants for me. The safe life. The protected life. And your work? The archives? I'll have centuries to work. The enormity of it struck her suddenly. Centuries to read every record. To write every truth they tried to hide. Alistair extended his hand, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. Last chance, he said. Walk away now. Find a good man like Dr. Reid wanted. Live a normal span of years. Isobel looked at his hand. She thought of Thomas, who'd chosen her over eternity. She thought of Dr. Reid, who still see her as someone who needed saving. She thought of Miss Finch's warning that Lord Thorne's interest never ended well. They were all trying to protect her from this choice. But it was hers to make. Isobel placed her hand in Alistair's. His skin was cold as marble, as permanent. Show me, she said. Show me how to stop being human. Alistair's fingers closed around hers. It starts with blood. Mine first, then yours. He raised his other hand to his mouth. His teeth, longer now, sharper, pierced his own wrist. Dark blood welled up. "Drink," he'd Gedoma, "and don't stop until I tell you." Isobel bent her head to his wrist. The blood tasted like copper and night and centuries of waiting. She drank until the Thames faded, until London disappeared, until there was nothing but the transformation burning through her veins like freedom.